Following the news in the press recently regarding the Fraudulent Mediums Act, we've come here today to Bournemouth Spiritualist Church, where we're going to learn a lot more about what it entails, and we know that the media is not going to tell you what you need to know about this act, and it's not going to tell you about the Spiritualist Church. So we've come to do that for you. We're going to answer a lot of questions that you might have that need answering. And who better to do that than the President and Vice President of this wonderful church? So we're going to go in just now and we're going to ask some very questions that I think will help you to understand the Fraudulent Mediums Act and who's instigating it and why. Inside this beautiful, beautiful church, and on the stage here we've got twins, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves so we all know which one is which. And they're going to answer the questions for you of what is spiritualism and what's the philosophy behind it, which I know a lot of people out there are asking a lot of questions about. So over to you.
Well, hello, my name is Al Potts and I am the president of Bournemouth Spiritualist Church.
And I'm Jeff Potts, and I'm the Vice President of Bournemouth Spiritualist Church.
In the light of the European directive to repeal the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which was brought in 1951 to replace the horrendous 1735 Act, the Witchcraft Act, we felt we would just like to give you a little insight into what spiritualism is all about and what spiritualism means to us.
Can I just say that unfortunately in the media and on television today, spiritualism is more or less put in the characteristic of an entertainment rather than a religion, a science, a philosophy and a way of life. And so spiritualism for many people is very much misinterpreted. And so in these few short moments we would like, if we can, to try to give a little clearer picture of what spiritualism is all about.
I mean, I would like to say that all religions derive from other religions. But spiritualism began, or modern day spiritualism began in 1848 on the 31st of March. And it began through the activities that happened in Hydesville, which is Wayne County, just outside of New York, when a family, the Fox family, Mr. and Mrs. Fox, and 2 of their 6 children moved into the little cottage. Their children, Catherine and Margaretta, were 9 and 12 at the time. And from moving into the house, strange things began to happen. There were knockings on the walls, the doors, the floors, rappings, vibrations going on, which they put down literally to an old cottage, wooden cottage, just, with age, making strange noises. It became a little frightening to them, so the parents decided to move the girls' beds into their bedroom, hoping that this phenomenon would stop. But it didn't. And eventually it happened so much that the girls actually became friendly with whatever it was that was making these noises. And through a series of conversations with the entity that was making the noises, they established that there was some kind of a spirit communicator trying very, very hard to communicate through the 2 girls. Through means of forming an alphabet, 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no, and 3 for maybe, they would pick out letters of the alphabet and they would say, is there an A in this question? 1 knock would come back, yes. Is there an S in it? 1 knock would come back, until they were able to formulate questions which they could put to this entity or whatever it was that was causing these noises. And by putting questions, they were able to ascertain that yes, it was the entity of a spirit who had moved on, who had actually been murdered in the cottage. He gave his name as Charles B. Rosner and said that he had actually had his throat cut by a previous owner, and his body was buried in the cellar. The previous owners were a Mr. John C. Bell and his wife, and a girl who stayed with them, who was a friend of the family, Lucretia Pulver. A peddler came to visit them around about 1843, 1844, his name being Charles B. Rosner, and it appeared to Lucretia that the family knew the peddler, and at this time they asked her to leave the house and go home. 3 days later she was invited to come back and stay with them. And she had asked the peddler before she left if he could bring some of his draperies and dress materials around to her father's house because she would like to buy some. Now, he never turned up. When the Bell family left for a few days, she decided to check down and have a look at where these noises were coming from, because they'd already started whilst the Bell family were in the house. And she went down into the cellar and noticed that there was some soft earth there. It looked as if a hole had been dug and filled with soft earth. Anyway, eventually, when mentioning this to the Bell family, they really just put it down to rats in the cellar. The Bell family moved out and the Weekman family moved in. They were only there for 18 months or so, and they too were disturbed by these rappings and knockings. And often Mr. Weekman would go to answer the door, and there was absolutely nothing there. When they moved out, the Fox family moved in, and of course this phenomena kept on and kept on until some contact was made with the spirit of the person, Charles B. Rosner, who was trying very, very hard to communicate. They dug up the cellar. He told them that he was buried in the cellar. They dug up the cellar floor, but they found only parts of a skull, a few little bird feathers and things of, no sort of special interest. And of course, many people came round. The interest was growing in the small town, and some people believed it and were fascinated by it, whilst others poo-pooed them, and they began to have people throw stones at the house that were dissatisfied with it. Those who were very, very religious were totally against this and thought that they were meddling with something that was more to do with the devil than anything of a spiritual nature. Now, it was strange because the Fox family were actually Methodists, and really in the beginning didn't believe about spirit communication in that way. Over time, the Fox family decided to move the girls in with their brother and his family in Rochester, New York, hoping that the phenomena would go away, but it didn't. And eventually they came back to the house and discovered that the walls in the cellar were beginning to crumble. They hadn't thought of looking behind the crumbling walls of the cellar, and as they crumbled, they found the body of the peddler, Charles B. Rosner, which proved that all along they had been right, and that the entity, the spirit entity that was trying so hard to communicate with them, was able to do so because the two girls, Kate and Margarita, were actually mediumistic. This had run in the family because in Mrs. Fox's family she had had sisters that were also mediumistic, but being Methodists they put it down to just bad dreams and things like this. And so the Fox sisters then began to be recognized as mediums and eventually plucked up the courage to take their mediumistic gifts out into the wider world. And many, many people, eminent people, came along to see them, including Emma Hardinge Britten, who brought spiritualism to Britain in 1852. This was the beginnings of spiritualism in our country as we now know it. And Emma Hardinge Britten was responsible through her transmediumship of bringing the 7 principles of spiritualism through to Great Britain, to the British government, because we had to have principles in order to be recognized as a religion. This was brought through the transmediumship of Emma from Robert Owen, who, in spirit, who was a great socialist and founder of the cooperative movement.
Can you tell us what those 7 principles are? We've just heard how spiritualism started, say in the old days, and of course a lot of people have the impression of darkened rooms, lifting tables. Is anybody there? Can you tell us how spiritualism works now in modern day times and
Yes.
the philosophy behind it?
Yes, can I first of all just tell you what the principles are? Because many people who have a great misunderstanding of spiritualism believe that we have something to do with the devil. And of course, spiritualism doesn't even believe in the devil. The principles are, number one, the fatherhood of God. Number two, the brotherhood of man. Number three, the communion of spirits and the ministry of angels. And number four, the continuous existence of the human soul. Number five, which I think is very important, personal responsibility. Number six is compensation and retribution hereafter for all the good and evil deeds done on earth. And number seven, eternal progress open to every human soul. Now, to say that we believe in the devil, I think you will realize especially from principle number one, that the center pin of our religion and our way of life is God. Spiritualism is, of course, a recognized religion. It is a science, it is a philosophy, but most of all, and most importantly, it is a way of life. It is how you live your life on this earth plane, as how that you will achieve in the next phase of your life when you pass to the world of spirit. Spiritualism, for me, embodies all religions. I think it was Alfred Russel Wallace, am I right, Al? Yes, who said that spiritualism can unite all religions. Alfred Russel Wallace was an honorary vice president of our church, and he was a very famous scientist. I'll let Al carry on a little bit with that because he did this in his lecture the other day.
Alfred Russel Wallace was a great man. He was the co-founder of the theory of natural selection with Charles Darwin. Unfortunately, Charles Darwin seemed to get most of the credit for that, as Alfred Russel Wallace was a very quiet man, a man that really wasn't looking for fame and fortune, and he allowed Darwin to really take most of the credit. It's being realized more nowadays that Alfred Russel Wallace had an awful lot to give. He was a naturalist, a botanist. He went all over the world finding different kinds of animals that hadn't until now been known about, and also plant varieties that we'd never heard of, and bringing them back to Britain. A very eminent man. It's last Wednesday, the 7th of May, would have been his 150th birthday. He became interested in spiritualism through his sister Fanny. She was a great spiritualist, and he began to realize that there was something more to life than just this physical life, and that there was an energy which was very difficult to explain, but that was there. And just as we now look at the electric lights and we switch the switch on the wall, we know that the light bulb is going to light up, but we can't see how that power, that energy is getting to the electric light bulb, but we know that it's going through the atmosphere. Just the same as with a television picture. We know that it's being projected from a camera, it comes onto the television, but we have no idea, we don't see it going through the air. And so he realized that there were many energies that were there in the atmosphere that we just couldn't see. And he began to realize through experiments that we possessed within us an energy, a power that could not be destroyed. And that was the part of us that animated our lives, our physical bodies. And that was the part of us, the real you and I, that actually moves from this phase of life into the next phase of life.
Can I just very briefly say that we have many people that say outside of our religion that don't understand us, that we don't believe in a God or we don't believe in Jesus, etc. The main difference between spiritualism and any other religion or other orthodox religions is the fact that we believe that each and every one of us, and in fact everything that lives, moves and has its being, is part of that creative power that we call God. That is the spark that gives life to everything in the whole universe. And as I said earlier, so if someone comes to me and says to me that I don't believe in God, then all I would say to them is open your eyes, open your ears and your senses, look around you, because you cannot be where God is not.
Yeah. The impression given, we were brought up in Christianity. I'm not ashamed to say that, because I think all paths lead to the one God. But we were brought up to believe that God was kind of in human form, a little old man sitting on a throne, with white hair and a white beard. But we soon came to the realization that what we perceive as God, and when I say what we perceive, it is impossible to truly perceive the true power of that divine intelligence that we call God. But how we perceive it in our limited way is a creative energy, a divine intelligence that is within everything that lives, moves and has its being, as Jeff said.
Now, the Fraudulent Mediums Act has been in place since 1951, the original act, and very interested to know, in your opinions, why do you think they brought an updated Fraudulent Mediums Act in, and who do you think is behind this and why?
Well, you see, the government's reasoning is that they are just trying to bring us in line with Europe, because we're part of the European community. However, I think it's a well-known fact that Britain is one of the only countries in Europe that is allowed to have spiritualist churches. There is plenty of spiritualist activity in the European community. Mediums are allowed to hold meetings in halls, to hire halls for them and do things in their own homes. But Britain is about the only country that has our spiritualist churches. And we feel that because Europe is generally dominated by the Orthodox churches, that this fear of spiritualism is coming into play, and that the Orthodox churches would really like to wipe spiritualism out. It might be a strong sentiment, but I truly believe it. And if they're repealing the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which has served us well for 57 years, what is the next move going to be? Is Europe going to say we must come into line with the rest of Europe and close down our spiritualist churches? Not on your life, I could say, because, we British are very middle of the road. And we're very quiet, but this is our religion, our way of life, and I feel honestly that spiritualists will stand up and be counted, because we don't feel that anyone has the right to tell us that we shouldn't follow our own religious beliefs and have that freedom that everybody else has. That's my only feeling I can think of why this has been brought in. They talk about harmonizing European law. But that word harmonizing is a really very strong word, a very difficult word. I don't think, we're all different nationalities, and if you try to force people to be the same, it tends to push people further apart. We can blend naturally without being forced. And I think the beauty of our country has always been that we've had the freedom of expression, the freedom to express ourselves the way that we wish to do. Let's not take away that freedom.
Yes. And I would say keep your hands off our religion.
Well, what would you suggest that you can do about this? A call to arms, writing letters. I hear you're doing a petition and writing to members of Parliament. What else do you suggest that we can do?
Well, there's already been a petition that was online,
Yes, online,
for people to sign. Thousands and thousands of people signed it, but the government literally has taken no heed of that at all. We are urging people to start petitions up in their spiritualist churches, as we are doing, and we are writing today to every member of Parliament with our objections to this act, and we urge other people to bombard their MPs with letters, with phone calls, with emails to show, their dissatisfaction with what is happening with this new act. We can achieve much if we put our minds to it. But if we sit back and just say, well, what can you do about it, which tends to be the British disease, we're so middle of the road here that we say, well, there's no point in saying anything because nobody will do anything about it. When the British people are pushed, that is when they react best of all. And I feel that we are really being pushed now. Let's react. Let's let our government and the European community know that we don't want this, that we won't accept this change in the law.
There's an old saying which says, united we stand, divided we fall. Are we going to fall by being divided, or are we going to be united and stand strong? I think as spiritualists and people who have common sense, whether you belong to another religion or not, you surely must be able to see the unfairness in this act. So let us stand united and win through.
Yeah. We are not a bag of potatoes to be bought over a counter. So please do not treat our religion as a commodity.
Can you just tell us a little about reincarnation, because that's another subject that comes up a lot along with the moving tables. How do you perceive the reincarnation? I won't call it a theory. How do you view that?
Can I say very briefly that in the early days of spiritualism, when spiritualism was just being rediscovered, and I say rediscovered because spiritualism has been about since time immemorial, but of course it was laid dormant for many years because of the Witchcraft Act, where mediums and healers would go into hiding, or they would be burned at the stake as witches, you see. And so
they really had to have, it was crude means by which they
that's
really communicated in the beginning, such as the wrappings,
really, wasn't it?
such as the wrappings. And when we talk about table tilting and things like this, yes, of course, it all went on because it was just proving that that we were able to use the energy that was there. Table tipping on its own doesn't make you a spiritualist, but it was there. It was, it had to be taken one step at a time. And of course, it was always a little bit more exaggerated in those days than it is now. It's been refined much more because, mediumship now is at a different level. There were wonderful people like Douglas Hume, D.D. Hume, who was able to levitate up to the ceiling. And there was an experiment that was attended by Sir William Crookes, one of the most famous of our scientists, where he levitated in a first floor office up to the ceiling, out of the window, and into the room next door, through the window, and into the room next door. This is just another form of energy, of utilizing that energy. And some people have that wonderful gift of being able to use that energy for those purposes.
Physical mediumship.
Everything, physical mediumship, wonderful people like Eusebio Palladino, the Italian medium, our own Gordon Higginson, who was president of the Spiritualist National Union for many years, Helen Duncan, they're all wonderful physical mediums who could produce, through the help of their audience, because ectoplasm comes from the energy of the people too, they were able to produce ectoplasm from which a form of a human being, but not in human form obviously, but a being would build up and could come out and hug you, touch you, speak to you, and feel as three-dimensional as you and I.
So the question of reincarnation now, we hear a lot about this, there's a lot of films about it, Hollywood touches on it. What is the stand of the, we'll call it the Spiritualist National Union, which perhaps you may also tell us the organisation that oversees the churches in the country. What is the sort of stand on the belief in reincarnation?
Well, the Spiritualist National Union leaves it to people to make their own opinion upon this. However, they do say that they don't feel as though there has been enough evidence yet to prove reincarnation. That is not to say that they don't believe it's possible. They leave the door open and allow people to find their own level of understanding. We had a deep trance medium here recently, and her guide invited questions. And of course the inevitable came up, what does he think of reincarnation? And the guide's answer was that we know not of reincarnation in my level of existence, but we do know of incarnation. He asked the question, why would anyone, after going through such trials and tribulations in the physical life, choose to come back and put themselves through that again? Yes, he said, maybe some will, but the vast majority, he said, will do what we believe in. They will incarnate into other levels of consciousness. So other levels might even mean onto other planets.
Who knows?
Who knows?
And the Spiritualist National Union we just mentioned, could you tell us who they are?
The Spiritualist National Union is the only recognised spiritualist body in the country. And they represent about, well, over 400 spiritualist churches in this country. Of course, we have other bodies. We have the Greater World, which is the Christian spiritualist movement. We also have the ISF, the International Spiritualist Federation, the SAGB, the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain. There are a number. But the only recognised body in Great Britain is the Spiritualist National Union.
I do believe that we have 3 churches in the United States that are aligned with the Spiritualist National Union here in Britain. I understand that either 1 or 2 of them are in New Jersey. I'm afraid I don't know where the 3rd one is, but I know that we would like very much to sort of align with other spiritualist unions around the world, not to necessarily amalgamate, but to work together, you know, on the same line of thought. Al and I, you asking the question about how we came into spiritualism. Well, that's quite a long story, but when we were brought up Church of England, we had an aunt through marriage who married into the family who was a deep trance medium. And she used to take us to one side as small children and talk to us about spiritualism. And of course, being like most people are that don't understand spiritualism, my mother would sometimes say to us, oh, they'll come and take you away in a little white van if you listen to her, you see. Very funny, really, but that's because of the misunderstanding, you see. However, we listened very carefully. And she used to say to us that we would do the sort of work or similar work that she was doing in our lifetimes, which of course we have done. But the main thing that she taught us, I think, was to open our minds and think for ourselves. Not to be led by dogma or creed, not to be told what we had to believe, but to have an open mind on everything. And so in a way she did a great service to us, I believe, because she in a way led us into spiritualism as we know it today. We were in show business for many, many years, entertaining all around the world. It didn't give us always the opportunity to work with spiritualism as we would have liked in those days. However, we did try to, wherever we were appearing in the world, to find either a spiritualist church or someone who knew something about spiritualism, so that we could sort of keep in with our thoughts. And so we kept it up for many, many years. And then when we decided to walk out of entertainment, and come into a regular way of life, we had then more time to be able to devote to our spiritual work and to the learning and the philosophy of spiritualism. And so we have been connected with spiritualism, I would say now, for over 50 years. Over 50 years.
Talking about entertainment now, a lot of people these days will recognise spiritualism perhaps with entertainment figures such as John Edward, Colin Fry, which obviously opens a lot of people up to the mediumship.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can tell us your views on that, and
Yeah.
also,
Yeah,
if one was to come along to a spiritualist church, what would the service consist of? What would actually occur in that church that evening?
Yes, okay. Can I just take the first part of the question first with people like John Edwards and other mediums who travel around the country and America and other countries too, giving demonstrations of mediumship in theatres and halls, etc. Can I say that we don't decry this whatsoever in spiritualism? They are giving of a service to people who probably would not think of coming into a spiritualist church. Why? I don't really know, but at least they are giving a service. However, I would say I would like it even more if they devoted just a little time during their demonstrations to give a short talk about the philosophy and the truths of spiritualism, because unfortunately the sort of people that go to these theatres and halls to see mediums such as Gordon Smith, etc., Tony Stockwell, they tend to go for messages. They're what we term message hunters. And they tend to think that the only thing that spiritualism is about messages. So untrue, for the philosophy of spiritualism is the most important part of spiritualism. You see, the philosophy of spiritualism, when a speaker speaks on the philosophy from a platform, from a rostrum, they are affecting every single person in the congregation or audience, whichever you want to call it, because they are touching each one personally. With a message from a medium, they are touching one individual. It doesn't mean to say that the interest from that message won't touch the others. It may do, but the philosophy touches everyone. It gives them a meaning to life. It gives them a direction to life. And it gives them a purpose to life.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I go along with what Jeff says about mediums who perform in theatres. I don't think it's the best way, but it certainly reaches a lot more people than we would find in our churches. And quite often the reason why they go to the theatres is because the word church tends to put a lot of people off, because what it does is it builds up in their minds the thoughts of a grey stone orthodox cold building, and if you look at our church here, it's quite warm really. It has a lovely atmosphere, but because church has always been sort of connected to orthodoxy, that is often the way that people think about it. And of course some of the atrocities that have actually been done in the name of religion, it's a combination of many things. We often wish that the mediums that are taking these demonstrations in theatres, and I know that Colin Fry has done this, would say at the end of their demonstrations, if you've enjoyed the evening, why don't you pop up to your local spiritualist church where you will get more of the same. In that way, they would not only be doing themselves a favour, but they would be doing the Spiritualist National Union, the organisation, a favour, and bringing people into the places where they should be going, because it isn't an entertainment. You know, this is our government's ruling that it must be seen, if it's done in a theatre, as an entertainment. If I want entertainment, you see, for me, spiritualism is something special. If I want fantasy, I go to Disney World, and I love fantasy. It takes you away from yourself, you become like a little child. But when I want reality, I come to spiritualism.
Can I very briefly just say that spiritualism is a religion that is built on love. There has never ever been a war or an atrocity in the name of spiritualism. And people usually comment when they come into our churches, the feeling of love and peace and tranquility and the feeling of caring one for the other, because the philosophy teaches us that the brotherhood of man, which is our second principle, tells us that we are all part of one another. As we are part of God, the fatherhood of God, principle number one, then we are intrinsically linked one to the other. We cannot be separated, no matter the colour of our skin, the creed or dogma that we follow. It makes no difference. We are all part of that creative power that we call God.
You see, mediumship, as much as it is condemned by some other religions, brings a comfort and an upliftment to people that very few other religions can do. We get people from all religions and all walks of life who come into our church. When they first come in, of course they're apprehensive because of the nonsense that they see on television or they read in the media. But it's usually, and that it's quite true, when someone has lost a loved one who's very dear to them and they're missing that physical presence. No other religion can give them the comfort and the assurance that their loved ones have survived the physical death and the proof than spiritualism can give. And we give it through mediumship, which is really mind to mind of the medium and the source that is directing that information.
Can I briefly say that spiritualism, as far as other religions are concerned, is the most tested religion in the world. Mediums like Gordon Smith, who is very famous in this country and of course works in America and all over the world, has been tested by Sir Archie Roy, who is a professor at the Scottish
Psychical
Research Society. Gordon has been tested so much, they have taken him and placed him in another room away from the people that he's going to give the message to, and he has been given messages to people in other rooms who he never seen or knew anything about. And that way, that he couldn't possibly be reading their minds. He's had so many experiments done on him, Gordon Smith, and I doubt whether any other people in other religions would be able to stand up to the scrutiny that spiritualism has to stand up to.
You know, it's very difficult because mediumship is always an experiment. You know, we're often portrayed through silly adverts on the television of sitting around a table holding hands, and the medium says, "Are you there, Uncle George?" And a voice in the distance says, "Yes, I'm here." And then a chocolate bar drops down from the ceiling. How convenient and how funny. But spiritualism doesn't work like that. We cannot call on those loved ones who wish to communicate. They have free will just the same as us, and they come of their own choosing. Now, a medium can stand on a platform. Gordon Smith has done this before, where he's appeared at a big hall in Edinburgh and nothing actually came. There was no communication, and he was honest enough to stand up and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, Spirit are not working with me tonight, so I'm going to introduce you to another medium." And they were actually putting him to the test to see if he would actually make it up or fake it. But Gordon is too honourable to do anything like that. And he was being put to the test. But, you know, mediumship is always an experiment. But what it does, when that experiment works well, it brings the comfort and upliftment to those who have lost a loved one, who are feeling that loss terribly. And it gives them the assurance that there is a life beyond this life, and that that bond of love that was there when their loved ones are on the earth still exists. And that is what attracts the communication, that continuous and everlasting bond of love.
You see, Spirit, just very briefly, Spirit cannot tell us how to live our lives. They cannot live our lives for us. And unfortunately, we do get from time to time certain people that will come into our movement that think Spirit are going to tell them exactly how to live their lives. That is not the way it works. Personal responsibility means that we have to be responsible for our own lives. They will guide us, but that's it.
So, an ordinary member of public coming into this church on a Sunday or Monday or whatever, what will they expect to find? What is the sort of order of service? How do you work this?
Well, hopefully, I would expect them to have a warm welcome as they came through the doors, because to us that's the most important thing. The order of service would change according to whatever day it is upon. Now on a Sunday we have two services, 10:45 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening, which we call our divine service, in which we will say prayers, sing hymns, the medium will give an address or lecture, whichever you wish to call it, and then the medium will also give a demonstration of mediumship or communication.
There's three different types, isn't there, of mediumship?
Of course, there are three different types of mediumship, I always say four, actually.
Yeah.
There is clairvoyance. Some mediums are clairvoyant, which means that they see through the senses of the spiritual eye, not the physical eyes. Or if they're clairaudient, then they hear, but not through the physical ears, through the senses. And then there is clairsentience, where the medium literally senses what is happening, and that is the most difficult, but most mediums actually work through clairsentience. Though they may say I'm seeing or I'm hearing, they're sensing, and that's very difficult. And then there's a lot of what I call clairnonsense, and that is when people stand up there and try to do something that they're not really qualified to do, and all we hear is a load of nonsense come out of their mouths. But the services do vary. Jeff will tell you about a Monday night.
Yes, we do try to steer very clear of that sort of thing. You see, can I just point out very clearly that spiritualism should not be confused with those people who go down to the end of the pier to see Madam whoever she is. Spiritualism is a link with spirit. It's not psychic, it's a link with spirit, where the medium will raise their vibrations to join spirit, to meet spirit halfway. Our Monday evening service, for me, is a very important service because we don't have any hymns on a Monday evening. The medium will open, if they wish, with a short prayer, and then they will give a talk about the philosophy of spiritualism. So it is an evening where people can come to be educated about spiritualism and the philosophy of it. They then have an opportunity to ask the medium questions. Now, of course, every medium is at different levels of learning, and so they will give the answers according to their experiences and according to their level of learning. And then we would just have a short demonstration of messages of mediumship to end the service. We get usually a lot of young people coming to that type of service because they're searching, they're wanting to know more about spiritualism, they're wanting to question the medium so that they can learn. And then on a Wednesday evening we have our seekers group. Now that is another evening where we have different types of mediumship. You will have everything from messages, how the medium gives their messages over, how they learn to open up to the world of spirit. We'll have everything maybe from psychic art to inspirational writing to philosophy, all different levels of mediumship, so it gives people an opportunity of learning about all the different types of mediumship.
But it's not actually an evening where a medium is invited necessarily to demonstrate.
No.
It's more of a teaching evening.
Yes.
Thursday afternoon is a service of mediumship, so there is no lecture or address. There's an opening prayer, closing prayer, a couple of hymns, and then just demonstration of mediumship. We do special evenings like an evening of mediumship where this is actually charged for on the door. Now other services are all free will offering, a donation, but we charge on the door. Not a lot. It's charged because we have to cover the medium's expenses, and we bring mediums from all over the country, so obviously a church being a charity, all of our churches are charities, we're not funded by any large organisation. Even though we are affiliated to the Spiritualist National Union, that itself is a charity. So we have to charge to cover the expenses of the medium, and of course to keep our churches open. We need to make a little money to cover the fabric of the church and to keep it going. And this is what this new act that's coming in is really carping on about, because they don't like the fact that we charge, and they're calling that a commodity. Well, it's not. It's to keep our churches open, and it's also to cover the expenses of the medium. Now, being affiliated to the Spiritualist National Union This is an umbrella body for us which is so good, a wonderful union which supports us. We have the Arthur Findlay College within that Spiritualist National Union, the wonderful stately home which belonged to Sir Arthur Findlay, who was a Scottish, wealthy Scottish businessman from Glasgow, came into Spiritualism like so many others to disprove it. Found that he couldn't, he had so much proof that he willed his home in 1964 to the Spiritualist National Union to become a college to teach the philosophy of Spiritualism and to train mediums. Now, it's very successful because people come from all over the world to study at the Arthur Findlay College. It's a great asset to us. And it was a wonderful gift from Sir Arthur Findlay. I mean, it was something more than we could ever have dreamed of. And you have to go to the Arthur Findlay College to appreciate the wonderful atmosphere there.
Can I just point out, Al, that we do have ministers in Spiritualism. Now, some people think that we don't have ministers. We have a wonderful training program where they have to go up training for certificates, diplomas, etc., and take an officiant's course, then a minister's course before they can become a recognised minister through law. And all the training facilities, all the courses are there available from Stansted Hall, from the Arthur Findlay College, for people who wish to take these courses to progress in their work for spiritualism.
And the ministers also have exactly the same recognition as a minister of any other denomination. So they are recognised through their qualifications in just exactly the same way as, say, a vicar from the Church of England or a priest from the Catholic Church.
Can I say that also on the last Wednesday of every month we have our open platform. We also have what we call fledgling evenings from time to time. And this is to encourage up-and-coming mediums, those mediums who are sitting in development circles, to be able to come forward and get a little experience of working in a church. You know, mediums tend to make their work look very easy. A medium will stand on the platform and people in the congregation will think that it's very simple, very easy. Let me tell you, being in show business with Al and I for many, many years, when you stand up on a stage, of course you rehearse so your word perfect. When you step up onto a platform in a spiritualist church, there's no rehearsal. You stand up there and you have to trust in those from the world of spirit who guide you and work with you. Call them guides, helpers, whatever you wish to call them, but you have to place your utmost trust in them. And if you don't, then I'm afraid you go astray. So you have to learn very quickly to trust. So, of course, the open platform gives the opportunity to those up-and-coming mediums to have a little experience before they actually come onto the platform full-time and work as mediums in our churches.
I mean, to me, we often get accused of talking to the dead. Well, that is a fallacy. I have often said, if you've ever tried to talk to a corpse, you won't get much response. What the medium does is the medium is the instrument for communication from the living spirit of that person who has passed away, who's just merely moved to the next stage of their existence, and who, as I said before, choose to communicate. And so for those people and those religions that accuse us of talking to the dead or in league with the devil, I'd like to just remind them, you know, that they all pray. And as I said to a minister from the Church of England who attended our church, do you speak to Jesus? His response was all the time. Now Catholics also pray to Jesus and pray to the saints. And my response to that is, isn't that talking to the dead?
So we're talking about spirits, mediums and people getting messages and whatever. Where exactly are these spirits, the people that have passed on and their spirits? Where are they? Are they up in heaven or sitting on a cloud? Can you enlighten us to this one?
I love that bit about sitting on a cloud playing a harp, if only. No, spirit is all around us. You see, when people talk about heaven and hell, well, you know, it's not up there or down there. The spirit world is all around us, just vibrating at different levels of vibration. That's all it is, really. It's all around us. The medium trains and learns how to tap into that level, tap into that world. And that's all it is, really. It's the most natural thing in the world. It has been done for centuries and centuries. It's not something that's just suddenly appeared. It's there have been mystics and seers, etc., healers, for centuries. It's nothing that's new. It is probably the most natural gift in the whole world.
I mean, when we talk about where is heaven and hell to spiritualists are states of mind. They are conditions that we create ourselves. You know, we can create our own heaven through what we do and how we live our lives in this world. Or we can create a hell, and we can not only make life hell for ourselves, but those around us. The spirit world, as Jeff said, is all around us. You know, we talked about energies and different frequencies. Well, all that happens is that we are the ones that have the limitations. Because we are encased in a heavy physical body of matter, we are restricted and we cannot perceive that next level of consciousness. Those who have moved to that next level of consciousness are vibrating on a much finer and quicker frequency. They are aware of us, though we are not aware of them. They don't take up space like a physical body does, because it's a body of matter, it's a heavy body. The spiritual body is a body of spiritual energy, atoms, protons, neutrons, and that energy can never be destroyed. It can only change its shape and form. So they're all around us, and those people who are sensitive, like mediums, have the ability to tune into that frequency and communicate with those on the next level of consciousness.
Yes. It is the same actually with spiritual healing, you see. It's just an energy, another form of energy, you see, where the healer will learn how to calm themselves down, to sit and meditate, to open or to clear the mind first of all the problems of our everyday lives, and to open the mind to allow that energy to flow through. And that's basic. It's so simple and so natural, and yet it's amazing how few people understand what it's all about.
We talked briefly before, or asked about a very wonderful physical medium called Helen Duncan. Now, Helen Duncan was from Glasgow in Scotland. She was just an ordinary middle-aged lady who had this wonderful spiritual gift of physical mediumship. We don't see so much of it now, but around about the Second World War, she became very well known for her physical mediumship. And it's where, when she has a big audience of people, or an audience of people, ectoplasm is produced from the medium's body. It's very depleting on the medium's health, but the ectoplasm is also produced from those in the audience, and it actually comes from the medium's nose, their mouth, their ears, the orifices, and it would look something like dry ice if one was wanting to say, what does it look like, you know? Hard to describe. And then what would happen was that it will build up, and then suddenly it will just sort of form on the floor, and from that ectoplasm will build the figure of a person from the next dimension of life, from the spirit world, if we want to call it that.
To make it simple, Al, it's a bit like Beam Me Up Scotty.
Yeah, but they're
to make it simple.
They're just as three-dimensional and as alive as you and I. And they would come out and hug their loved ones in the audience, shake hands with people. They felt just as warm as you and I, and as solid as you and I. The ectoplasm often depleted the medium because it's taking energy from the medium's body. Now, what happened with Helen Duncan was that she was accused of being fraudulent. And there was one particular seance that she held, I believe, in Portsmouth, and it was during the Second World War, when she was given information in a deep trance state, this was, and in a deep trance state, then the medium's spirit will vacate her body so that the energy of the entity or the guide that's working through her can come into her body. And she was given information from the spirit world that a ship had been sunk by the Germans. It had been torpedoed. And the entity that was communicating was a sailor from that ship. And his mother was in the audience, and he greeted his mother and said that he was sorry to tell her that his ship had gone down and that he'd lost his life, but he was okay. Now this was a shock to the mother. The ship had actually been sunk 3 weeks before, but the Ministry of Defence had decided not to announce this and let any of the family know. Of course, the Ministry of Defence was informed about this séance, and they immediately arrested Helen Duncan as a German spy, because they couldn't understand how she could know about this before they'd even announced it. She was jailed for 6 months, and she was jailed under the 1735 Witchcraft Act. Now, it was through this that the Fraudulent Mediums Act was actually brought into being. Some months later, Helen did took a séance again in Portsmouth, I believe, when an invited audience was there, but somehow someone informed the press. And when she was in this deep state of trance, the police burst in, she was arrested, and of course through the shock of the spirit that controls her body, through the shock of that spirit leaving suddenly and her own spirit being whipped back in, the whole of her inside was burnt. She was rushed to hospital and she died 6 days later. Now, she was the last person to be convicted under the Witchcraft Act of 1735, and it was through that experience that Tom Brooks MP introduced a bill with the aid of Sir Winston Churchill to bring forth the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which put mediums on the same level as everybody else, that they were innocent until proven guilty. Now, this has served us well for 57 years. Now, all of a sudden, the European Union has decided to repeal that act and to set us amongst the Consumer Protection Act and treat us like a commodity, just like a bag of potatoes being sold over the counter of a supermarket. And now, mediums, if they are convicted as being fraudulent, are going to be guilty until they can prove themselves innocent. This goes against our human rights, because all people in this country, through the Human Rights Act, are considered innocent until proven guilty. But because we're now being considered a commodity, and this will not affect our Sunday services, but will affect those evenings of mediumship that we put on, or workshops, trance evenings, or private sittings. They'll affect us in a way that they will affect the income of the church, and they won't allow us to pay for the visiting mediums to come, whose costs we have to cover. And this is where we think this is really very unfair on spiritualism, because it will take away our ability to bring in these speakers and demonstrators and to keep our churches running.
I believe spiritualism is a recognised religion along with the Church of England, is that right? And some years ago.
Yes, that is perfectly correct. It was made a recognised religion through an Act of Parliament in 1951, along with the Church of England, which of course was brought about as a recognised religion during the reign of Henry VIII. We are one of only 2 recognised religions in the country. The Church of England in the 1930s had a survey done into spiritualism by the then Archbishop of Canterbury, and he asked a number of his archbishops and bishops to look into spiritualism through this survey, and they spent some time looking into spiritualism. And then, unfortunately, the report that was made by these bishops was shelved for more than 40 years before it was allowed to be released. When it was released, I believe in the 1970s, it found that there was absolutely nothing that the bishops and archbishops found in spiritualism that they could disagree with. And yet today we still have people from the Orthodox churches criticizing us, even though they agreed that there was nothing they could find to criticize in spiritualism. They could agree with everything. It saddens us in spiritualism to think, although we have religious freedom in our country, that we are still judged by Orthodox religions.
I think the sad thing is really that if we take spiritualism, people say, well, where does Jesus figure in spiritualism? Well, the difference between us and Orthodoxy is that we in spiritualism do not see Jesus as our saviour. But then neither do the Muslims, neither do the Hindus or the Sikhs, neither does the Jewish religion, or of course the Buddhists. So we're not really, to be singled out, we're not really on our own. We see Jesus as a wonderful master, a prophet,
teacher,
one of many who have come to this earth plane. There's been, if we read back in history, there have been at least about 32 prophets that have come to this earth, either born in a stable or a cave of a virgin mother, and died on a cross. 16 of those, by the way, that have apparently died on a cross and born of a virgin mother. So, you know, this is not something that is something new to even Christianity.
And they're not asked to prove that, are they?
You know, when it comes to proving, you know, it's very, very difficult. We don't see Jesus as our saviour. We see him as a wonderful prophet. We think that there's some wonderful teachings in the Bible that we can actually learn by. But just as the Muslims, we see him as a prophet. So we don't decry Jesus by any means. But then again, we don't control people by telling them what to believe. We have no fear that if people don't believe, you know, that they will walk away from us.
Yes. Our religion is not built on fear. Our religion is built on love, perfect love, because God is love. I would say that it saddens me in this day and age that we still come under such scrutiny from other religions, because if we are all part of God, then we should believe that we should be open to our own interpretation. We should be open to believe which direction we feel is right for us, not to be told what we have to believe, not to be judged, not to be frightened into believing in a certain way. This is the beauty about spiritualism, is we don't frighten people into believing. It's not a religion that is built on fear. It is a religion that is built on pure love, and which gives the person or persons the opportunity to accept or not to accept what is given, entirely up to them because of the free will that they have.
I think that spiritualism empowers you as a human being and as a spirit, empowers you to follow that pathway that is right for you. You know, nobody's twisting your arm up your back and forcing you to follow a pathway which may feel uncomfortable to you. It allows you to find your own level of acceptance. You know, you may come to a spiritualist church for the very first time, and you may experience a medium on the platform and think to yourself, didn't think much of that. But then again, you have to understand that everybody works according to their own level of development. We're like a school, you know, full of children, and we're in different classes. The people in the earlier years will not have the knowledge of those people who have moved up to the higher levels of understanding and of education. And just with mediums, you know, we have to give mediums opportunity to experience and to learn. And so when they work on the platform, if they're just coming into this movement, they're not going to have the experience of a medium who's been working for 40 or 50 years. but you take away from, always will take away something from that medium. And we tend to say, don't judge them, but just take what you can take from what they say. And then if you keep coming, you will then come across a medium or mediums that you can really identify with, and you'll say, now that's what I feel it's all about.
See, I had a question once from a Catholic priest who said to me, how dare you do healing in your church? So I said, I'm very surprised to hear you say that, because if your belief in Jesus is so strong and in the words in your Bible, then you would know that Jesus said, whatsoever I shall do, ye shall do also, and greater things than I have done, you shall do. Jesus did not say he was the only one that would be able to heal. He was a very highly evolved spirit, so he could touch people and heal them. We had a famous healer in Spiritualism who is now in the world of spirits called Harry Edwards, who had that same gift of being able to touch people and heal them. You have Sai Baba in India today who has that same gift, you see, and there are many people who have that gift.
This is the Spiritualist National Union hymn book, just to give you a little idea of a Sunday service here, a typical service. 7 principles, which we've told you about. And here's some hymns, some of our favourite hymns in here, all through the night. Morning has broken. I walk in the light. Some really lovely hymns in here. And music, of course. And we have the prayer, we have the Lord's Prayer. O come all ye faithful for Christmas. Their services here are very light, very joyful. Very, very enjoyable indeed.